Okay, everyone, we're going to start talking about, in the module 3, we're talking about the various psychodynamic perspectives, psychosocial theories, as well as humanistic perspective. Today, we're going to start chapter 8, the psychoanalytic perspective. I'm sure you've heard of this guy. You've learned about him in your other psychology classes. Probably the most well-known figure in psychology, Sigmund Freud. Let's talk about the psychoanalytic perspective, psychoanalytic theory, and some of the basic concepts within it. Again, it started from Freud, obviously. The idea is that personality is dynamic and that there's always conflict. Dynamic means kind of in motion. There's always some kind of conflict between various aspects of the personality. We'll talk about the id, the ego, and the superego, and how they interact with each other and sometimes get into some conflict. Also, another theme regarding this particular theory, psychoanalytic theory, is that there are unconscious and uncontrollable forces that are influencing our behavior. In particular, we're talking about these forces are essentially based on sex and aggression. Obviously, coming from the time period that Freud was discussing his theory, developing his theory, that was pretty controversial. Another issue we're going to be talking about are defense mechanisms, that these defense mechanisms help us manage threat by essentially protecting us from anxiety. And so that's an important aspect that we'll be talking about as well. Finally, it's very symbolic. So the perspective is metaphorical. So in other words, there are various things. Images are symbols for something else. This is particularly relevant when we come to dreams. The idea that the images that we see in dreams should not be taken literally, but they should be taken as symbols of something deeper, something more hidden. So we'll talk about all of that. Let's move on. Okay, let's take a look at the model of the mind as Freud sees it in terms of the various levels of consciousness. Okay, so if you take a look over here on the right side of this screen, you have the conscious mind, the preconscious, and the unconscious mind. The perfect analogy that's often used is the iceberg analogy, in that in an iceberg, what you see above the surface of the water is a very small portion of the iceberg. Likewise, what Freud would say is that that portion of your mind, the conscious mind, is a very, very small portion of our minds as well, and that what is going on under the surface is a lot more interesting, a lot more important in terms of guiding our behavior. The preconscious is outside of our current awareness, but we can access it. So these memories and that we can retrieve will fall into the preconscious mind. Finally, the unconscious mind is deeper in our mind, and that's stuff that we can't just voluntarily bring out. That's stuff that is kept hidden. So we'll talk about each of these in a moment. So the conscious level, this is what you're currently aware at any given moment. This is the conscious level. You can articulate what is on your conscious mind. You can be talking about it. It is what you're thinking about right now. That's your conscious mind. And again, you could be thinking about it in a rational, logical manner. So this is essentially what you're thinking about right now. And again, according to Freud, it is a very, very small portion of who we are. Then there's a preconscious level, which is a larger component of our mind. It's just basically stuff that we've kept in our memory. And there's a lot of stuff that we have in our memory. Obviously, we remember what we had for dinner last night. We might remember our 16th birthday party. So these are events and that we might remember. And that would be located in our preconscious. We may not be thinking about it right at this moment. They might not be in our consciousness right now. But they can certainly be brought to our current awareness. And then finally, the unconscious level. Now, according to Freud, this is the most interesting part. These are the aspects of our mind that are actively kept from our consciousness. This is the kind of stuff that we do not want to have to essentially be thinking about. Thinking about it causes us anxiety, so we keep it out of our conscious mind. Okay? That's why they're actively kept from our consciousness. Actively kept there. Okay? So various images, emotions, anxiety, pain, fear, stuff again that we don't want to necessarily deal with consciously. Okay? They can, however, make it into our conscious mind, but they typically would only be done in some kind of a distorted form. Perhaps, for example, in our dreams. Perhaps, for example, in what are called Freudian slips, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And the contents of this unconscious really has an impact on our personality. It really kind of pushes us. It kind of is really, from Freud's perspective, the most important part of our personality. Most important part of our mind. So we have these two sources in this process. We have repression, the stuff that we have pushed into our unconscious. That's repression. That's the stuff that we might, maybe an unpleasant memory that we've pushed into our unconscious, for example, would be something we've repressed. And there's also a phylogenetic endowment, which Freud talks about. And this is essentially our inherited unconscious images that come from our ancestors. It's essentially, maybe think about from an evolutionary point of view, what we have in this unconscious that maybe we share as a species. Now, interestingly enough, one of Freud's followers, Carl Jung, who we'll talk about in another PowerPoint presentation, was someone who really went further with the concept of the phylogenetic endowment, the conscious, what he called the collective unconscious. And the idea is that we have these unconscious images that are drawn up in our species, and as a result, it kind of binds us together with others. And it's in our unconscious, but it's a collective unconscious, not really necessarily something we personally repressed, but something that's in there. Now, Freud really emphasized more repression, what we've essentially individually, put into our unconscious. In that case, it's much more of an individual exploration when it comes to that. And he didn't really talk too much about the phylogenetic endowment. Didn't really emphasize that.